Montana Territory, 1883. The wind tore across the flats outside Miles City, dragging dust and regret in its wake as Kathryn Jennings stepped off the stagecoach, her boots hitting the packed earth like a final answer. She adjusted her bonnet and looked down the line of storefronts and saloons. No one waited for her. Not the man she had exchanged letters with. Not anyone. Just three cowboys giggling near a hitching post, not bothering to hide their stares. "She is older than my ma," one of them muttered, loud enough for her to hear. Kathryn kept her back straight, her grip tightening on the satchel that held everything she owned. 42 is not old, not when you had survived a husband's death, a farm's collapse, and the ache of waiting for something better. But out here, in a town full of men chasing youth and new beginnings, she might as well have worn a sign that said unclaimed and unwanted. The postmaster, a wiry man named Harold, cleared his throat from behind the counter when she stepped inside. "You Kathryn Jennings?" he asked, already knowing. "Yes." He looked uncomfortable. "I got a telegram for Mr. Albert Granger 3 days ago. Said he changed his mind. Found a local girl. Sorry." Kathryn did not cry. She only nodded, slowly, like each word took a piece of her and set it down somewhere she could not reach. Then she turned, walked outside, and sat on her trunk near the freight office with the sun painting the front of her dress in gold and sweat. She had no plan now. No money to go back east. No home to return to. "Ma'am?" The voice came from a few paces off. Kathryn looked up. He could not have been over 25. Tall, with sun-browned skin, a strong jaw, and a hat pushed back on a mop of sandy hair. His shirt was dusted from the road, and he held the reins of a chestnut gelding. His eyes met hers, steady and honest. "I saw what happened in there," he said. "Name's Callum Zayden. I work out at the Twin Creeks spread west of town." She cleared her throat. "Kathryn Jennings." He nodded. "I do not mean to intrude, but you look like you could use a hand." "I do not take charity," she said, more from habit than pride. "I am not offering charity," he said. "I am offering a ride. You should not be sitting out here alone. You can come out to the ranch for a few days. My boss, Miss Hazel, she is always looking for help with cooking and laundry. You can earn your keep till you find your footing." Kathryn hesitated, but she had nowhere else to go. And his eyes. They held no mockery, just quiet kindness. "All right," she said. They rode in silence for most of the way. The land opened up under the falling sun, the grasslands rolling out in waves. The ranch sat at the foot of a low ridge, with 2 barns and a square house with smoke curling from the chimney. Hazel, a short woman with a limp and a strong grip, looked Kathryn up and down, and then nodded once. "You can sleep in the back room," she said. "And the boy's right. I can use help." That night, Kathryn lay on a cot in a room that smelled of wool and pine soap. She stared at the ceiling and listened to the soft thud of horse hooves in the pasture beyond. She did not cry. She had done enough of that. But her chest hurt with the weight of what she had lost again. The next morning, Kathryn found her hands busy with bread dough and her mind quiet. Hazel did not ask questions, just showed her where things were. Callum came in from the barn around noon, his shirt damp, his hair stuck to his forehead. He nodded at her, then filled a tin cup with water and drank deep. "You settling in?" he asked. "I am." "Good. Hazel likes you already. That is saying something." Kathryn folded the dough and turned it. "Why did you help me, Callum?" He leaned back against the counter. "I was raised by a woman not much younger than you. She was strong, smart. She had 3 jobs, ran a house, raised me and my sister after our pa died. Folks looked down on her too, said she was too old to start over. But she did." Kathryn blinked hard. "She sounds like someone I would have liked." "I think you remind me of her," he said quietly. Over the next week, Kathryn found herself watching Callum more than she meant to. He was good with the horses, gentle with the colts, quick to laugh when Hazel teased him, and always quick to help without asking. One afternoon, as they hauled buckets of water from the creek, he turned to her suddenly. "I know what the folks in town said. About your age." Kathryn stilled. "I am not blind. I heard it. And I think they are fools." She looked at him, unsure what to say. "You walk taller than any woman I have met. You do not let life knock you down. That is not weakness. That is grit." Her breath caught. "You are a kind boy. I am not a boy," he said, stepping closer. "And I am not being kind. I am being honest." Their eyes locked. She stepped back, not out of fear but confusion. No one had looked at her that way in years. That night, she found a small bouquet of prairie flowers on her cot. No note, just the petals, bright and soft and unexpected. The next morning, she found Callum waiting outside with 2 mugs of coffee. "I thought maybe we could ride out toward the bluff," he said. "Good view up there." Kathryn hesitated, but something in his voice made her say yes. They rode in silence for a while, the horses moving slow through the grass. At the top of the bluff, the whole valley spread out below them. "It is beautiful," she said. "So are you." She turned her head sharply, but he did not look away. "Callum, I know you think I am too young. I know what folks would say, but I do not care. You are the first person I have met who makes me want to stay put. To build something. Something real." Her eyes filled before she could blink it away. "You do not know everything about me. I have lived a long, hard life. I want to know all of it," he said. "If you let me." Kathryn looked out over the land. It was quiet, soft, full of promise. Then she turned back to him, her voice low. "All right." He smiled, slow and real, and reached for her hand. She let him, and for the first time in years, Kathryn felt like she was not alone. The frost held late that spring. Mornings came with a silver sheen across the grass, and Kathryn woke each day wrapped in the wool blanket Hazel had handed her without a word. The old house groaned in the wind, but it held together, just like the people inside it. Kathryn spent her days tending to what needed doing, hauling water, mending harness straps in the quiet shade of the porch, scouring the iron pans till her fingers stung. Hazel didn't hover, and Kathryn didn't waste time talking unless there was something to say. The rhythm suited her, and she found her mind quieter for it. By the second week, Callum had begun showing up earlier than chores required. He'd lean against the lintel with a cup of coffee, or bring her a sliver of smoked trout from the line he kept strung near the creek. He didn't press her with compliments or questions, but he didn't keep his distance either. His nearness was steady, like the sun returning each dawn. One morning, she found him splitting fence rails near the west pasture. She watched from the edge of the slope before walking down with a canteen. "You'll wear yourself out before midday," she said, handing it to him. He took it, wiping his brow with the back of his arm. "It keeps my thoughts from snarling." She nodded, setting down beside the stump where he'd been working. "You wrestle with them often?" "Lately, yes." He didn't elaborate, not right away. A hawk circled high above them, casting a shadow that passed briefly across Kathryn's skirt. "I left home at 17, he said finally. "My uncle had a ranch near Billings, needed help. I figured it'd be temporary." "What changed?" "He died the next winter. Fever took him fast. I stayed long enough to run the cattle to auction, then drifted south. I don't think I ever really stopped looking for something that felt like belonging." She traced a crack in the wood beside her. "And here?" He looked straight at her. "This place don't scare me. And neither do you." She held his gaze, finding no flicker of jest or uncertainty there. Just truth, plain as the wind. Later that evening, Kathryn sat with Hazel in the lean-to kitchen, shelling beans beside the window. Hazel's hands worked like clockwork, but her eyes flicked up once or twice toward the yard, where Callum brushed down the horses. "You planning to stay long?" Hazel asked, not unkindly. I hadn't decided. Well, that boy's changed since you came. He's steadier. Laughs less, but means more when he does. Kathryn turned slightly in her seat. You disapprove? Hazel shook her head.
No.
Just surprised. He's not the type to trail after shadows. Whatever he's looking for, he thinks it's you. Kathryn fell quiet. Outside, Callum walked the bay mare back toward the paddock, his arm resting lightly across her withers. That night, as Kathryn folded the last of the laundry, she heard a soft knock at the back door. She opened it to find Callum holding a folded cloth bundle. I made this, he said. For you. She opened it on the table, revealing a pair of leather gloves stitched by hand, the lining soft, the palms reinforced for carrying buckets and hauling rope. They'll last, he said, and I thought maybe you'd use them more than I would. She ran her fingers over the seams. You could have kept them, he shrugged. I'd rather see them on you. Kathryn held the gloves for a long moment, then looked up. You've been careful with me. I don't want to be careful. I want to be good. She stepped closer. There's a difference? He nodded once. Careful can be distance. Good means I'm here. That I stay. Her breath hitched just once. Then she reached up, pressed her palm to his chest. You're here, she said quietly. That's enough. His hand came to rest on hers, fingers warm and certain. They stood like that for a while, the oil lamp flickering behind her, the quiet of the house folding in around them.
No declarations. No promises.
Just the hush of something beginning to root. Late April brought a thaw that softened the earth and loosened the ice in the creek beds. Kathryn woke each morning to the hush of snowmelt dripping from the eaves and the scent of damp soil rising through the floorboards. The wind lost its bite, and roan calves began to appear at the edges of the herd like timid questions. Hazel sent Callum and Kathryn up to the high pasture one day with a pack mule and 2 days' rations. A fence had come down in the last storm, and the posts needed resetting before the cattle drifted too far. Kathryn rode ahead, the slope steepening beneath her as the valley narrowed into pine. She felt the strain in her thighs, but it steadied her a clean, honest ache. Callum rode just behind, quiet but watchful. The pack mule plodded behind them, swaying beneath the load of cedar rails and tools. They made camp where the ridge flattened into a clearing. Kathryn built the fire, while Callum pitched the canvas lean-to. Neither said much. It wasn't silence from awkwardness, just the kind that settles when two people understand the rhythm of shared work. As dusk lowered, Kathryn rolled up her sleeves and stirred beans in the skillet. Callum sat nearby, sharpening a draw knife on a flat stone. You said once you left home young, she said, not turning from the fire. Did you ever think of going back? Callum paused, then resumed the blade's slow scrape. My sister wrote for a while. Said our mother took sick not long after I left. I sent what money I could, but I stayed away. Kathryn stirred slowly. Why? I think I was afraid I wouldn't recognize what was left. She handed him the tin plate and sat cross-legged beside him. The fire cast its shadow long across the moss. My mother lived to see me married, she said, her voice low. She didn't like the man. Said he was too sharp around the edges. But I didn't listen. By the time I saw it, it was too late. Callum glanced over. He hurt you. Not with fists. But he made me small. Every year, smaller. She looked down at her hands. I didn't notice until I couldn't hear my own voice anymore. Callum set his plate aside. You don't seem small now. I'm not. Not anymore. He reached over, brushing his fingers lightly against hers.
I'm glad.
That night, Kathryn lay beside the fire on her side of the canvas, listening to the wind thread through the pine. Callum's breathing was steady beside her. The stars blinked sharp through the trees. You ever think about settling somewhere? She asked softly. I used to think I wasn't made for staying put. But lately, I've been wondering what it'd feel like to wake up knowing someone else was counting on me. He was quiet for a while, then said, "Would you let someone count on you again?" Kathryn turned her head toward him. "If I believed they'd never ask me to be less than I am." The fire cracked once, a soft hiss of sap in the flames. Callum shifted closer, his breath warm in the space between them. "I'd never ask that." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The next day, they worked side by side, driving cedar posts into thawed ground. Kathryn held the rails steady while Callum hammered the joints tight. By midday, her arms ached and a blister had torn open below her thumb, but she didn't stop. Not when he was watching her with that quiet pride he never spoke aloud. They ate lunch sitting on a felled log, drinking creek water and passing jerky between them. "You're not like other women I've known," Callum said. Kathryn arched a brow. "Is that meant kindly?" "It's meant true. You don't fill silence just to hear yourself. You don't ask for more than what you need. And you see things. Like the way Hazel favors her right leg, or how the bay gelding spooks at shadows, but not storms." She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "I spent a long time learning to watch instead of speak. I like that about you." Kathryn met his gaze, the air still between them. "And what else do you like?" Callum hesitated, then reached out and brushed a speck of dust from her cheek. "I like the way you don't flinch when things get hard. The way you don't expect sweetness, but you still deserve it." She looked down at her lap, her voice rough. "You're not afraid of the years between us?" He shook his head. "You've lived more in those years than most men I've met twice my age. That's not something I fear. That's something I want to learn from." For a long moment, the only sound was the wind through last year's grass. Kathryn said, "I never thought I'd want someone again." "Not really." Callum's hand settled over hers, firm and sure. "I want you. That's not going to change." She didn't speak, but her fingers curled around his. They finished the fence that afternoon and rode back late the next morning. Hazel met them at the gate, eyeing the new blisters on Kathryn's hands and the sun-dark line beneath Callum's collar. "I take it the rails are in," she said. "They are," Kathryn replied. Hazel gave a single nod. "Then you've both earned your supper." That evening, when Kathryn stepped outside to shake out the dishwater, she found Callum waiting by the corral. He didn't speak, just offered his arm. She took it. They walked toward the edge of the pasture, where the land dipped toward the creek. The sky was the color of ash and rose, the moon just a breath from full. Kathryn looked out toward the horizon. "I think I want to stay." Callum turned to her. "With me? If you'll have me." He didn't speak. Just leaned down and kissed her, soft and certain, the way a man does when he means forever. And Kathryn, who had once believed her heart too weathered for such things, let herself believe it too. By mid-May, the cottonwoods along the creek unfurled their leaves like small green hands, and the cattle grew restless with the warming days. Kathryn stood at the edge of the yard one morning, watching as Callum and Hazel loaded the wagon with feed sacks and salt blocks. Dust curled around their boots in low spirals. Hazel glanced back toward the house. "You coming?" Kathryn stepped down from the porch. "I am." They drove east along the river trail, Callum at the reins, Hazel wedged between them, chewing a sliver of birch bark. The wagon rocked over shallow ruts, and the sun glinted off the rusted hardware at the corners of the canvas. They reached a small homestead before noon, a slant-roofed cabin with smoke rising from the chimney and a coop of hens scratching in the dirt yard. A widow named Mrs. Cray lived there with her 2 boys, and Hazel had promised her a few sacks of feed in trade for a bolt of calico and a basket of dried apples. While Hazel bartered with the woman inside, Kathryn watched the older boy struggle to patch a wagon wheel. He couldn't have been more than 12, but his jaw was set hard, and his fingers were red from the effort. Callum stepped beside her. "Reminds me of my sister's boy. always trying to do what's meant for grown hands. Kathryn nodded. I used to think children shouldn't carry weight like that. Then, I learned the world doesn't wait for anyone to grow old enough. Callum shifted his weight, quiet for a moment. I got a letter last week. From my sister. Kathryn looked at him. She well? She's living in Helena now, teaching at a mission school. Her boy's near grown. She asked if I ever planned on sending word back home. What did you tell her? I haven't answered yet. Kathryn studied the lines at the corners of his mouth. What makes you hesitate? He glanced toward the cabin. I don't want to write until I know what I'm writing about. I want to give her something real. Something more than just miles and dust. Kathryn reached for his arm. Then you wait until the words are ready. That evening, back at the ranch, Hazel pulled a cedar box from beneath her bed and handed it to Kathryn. I've been keeping this for when the time felt right. Inside lay a set of worn books, their pages softened by years of turning, and a folded square of blue muslin. I was married once, Hazel said, her voice dry as lye soap. Briefly. He gave me these before he left for the war. Never came back. I've held on to them, thinking I'd know when someone else could use a start. Kathryn smoothed a hand over the cloth. I don't know what to say. Don't say anything. Just make use of it. That night, Kathryn sat beneath the open window, with one of the books balanced on her knees. Callum joined her after the lamps were blown out, brushing hay from his sleeves. I've been thinking, he said, about building a second room onto the house. Hazel's got that old lumber stacked behind the barn, and I figure it's time we carve out something of our own. Kathryn looked up. You're sure? He knelt beside her, taking her hand. I've never been more. She closed the book and let her fingers curl into his. Then let's do it. But I want to help. Every nail, every board. Wouldn't have it any other way. The next morning they began. Callum measured the posts while Kathryn marked the beams with a charcoal stub and a strip of twine. Hazel watched from the porch, her hands folded loosely in her lap, saying nothing but offering coffee when the sun reached its peak. By the third day, the frame stood upright, rough but solid. Kathryn stepped back and let her eyes trace the lines of it the way it leaned just slightly east, the way the morning light caught on the new wood. Callum came up beside her. It's not much yet. It's more than I ever thought I'd have again. He brushed his knuckles along her shoulder. I want to ask you something. She turned to him, waiting. I want to make this real. Not just the room. Us. Her heart caught, not in surprise, but in the quiet rightness of the moment. Yes, she said, before he could say more. You don't have to ask again. He let out a breath, one he hadn't realized he'd been holding, and pulled her close. They stood like that for a long time, the scent of sawdust and spring grass rising around them. Two people, steady on their feet, with nothing borrowed and nothing owed. They had built something with their own hands, and they would keep building, piece by piece, until the work was done. And when it was, they would live in it together fully, honestly, and at peace. By June, the new room stood finished, its walls chinked with mud and straw, the rafters tight and dry. Kathryn had sewn simple curtains from flour sacks, and Callum had carved a small shelf for her books, sanding the edges smooth until they felt like river stones in her hands. She'd never had a space of her own that welcomed her without condition. Now, she stepped across its threshold each evening with something warm settling in her chest. They slept side by side on a straw mattress Kathryn had stitched from ticking and stuffed full with fresh ryegrass. Some nights, he would reach for her hand beneath the quilt, his thumb brushing the soft skin of her wrist until sleep took them both. Nothing rushed, nothing demanded, just the quiet certainty of shared breath and steady hearts. One afternoon, Hazel handed Callum a letter. The envelope was creased and bore a Helena postmark. He stood near the barn for a long while after reading it, the wind tugging at the paper in his hands. When he returned to the house, Kathryn was stitching a hem at the kitchen table. "It's from my sister," he said, setting the letter down. "She's coming through Miles City in 2 weeks. Wants to meet you." Kathryn looked up from her work. "You wrote her?" "I did. Told her everything that matters." She laid her hand over his. "Then we'll ride in together. I'd like to meet the woman who raised a man like you." A week later, they packed supplies into saddlebags, dried venison, a tin of beans, 2 biscuits wrapped in cloth, and rode east along the Yellowstone River. The journey took a day and a half, with one night spent beneath the open sky. They shared a blanket and a canteen, their backs pressed together for warmth. At dawn, Miles City unfurled before them, the roofs low and sun-washed, the streets quiet but stirring. They found his sister waiting outside the stage office, her boy perched beside her on a bench. She was wiry, taller than Kathryn expected, with thick brows and eyes that held the same clear steadiness as Callum's. "You must be Kathryn," she said, offering her hand. "I am." The handshake was brief, but firm. "He wrote that you were stubborn and kind." I see he didn't exaggerate. They shared a meal at a boarding house, and Kathryn learned that the boy had his uncle's laugh, and the sister had a way of saying things plain without apology. They spoke of Montana's winters, the cost of flour, the way the prairie changed shade just before rain. No questions about the years between Kathryn and Callum.
No judgment.
Just quiet interest and approval tucked into the corners of conversation. That evening, outside the livery, Callum's sister touched Kathryn's arm lightly. "I'm glad he found someone who sees him." "I'm glad he saw me," Kathryn replied. They rode home under a sky streaked with the last of summer's pink. Callum didn't say much until they neared the ridge above the ranch. Then he reined in his horse and looked out across the land, the fields golden in the low light. "I used to think I'd drift forever. That I wasn't made for staying." Kathryn pulled her horse alongside his. "And now, I want a life that holds. One with roots. With you." She reached for his hand across the space between their saddles. "Then stay. And let's make something that lasts." They married at the ranch 2 weeks later. Hazel stood as witness, her best kerchief tied around her neck, and the Cray boys brought a pie they'd baked themselves, crust slightly burnt but offered with pride. Callum wore a clean shirt and a carved button Kathryn had polished the night before. She wore the muslin Hazel had once kept folded tight, and a strip of blue ribbon Callum had traded for in town. There were no vows beyond what they already lived: shared work, quiet trust, and the promise of presence. He kissed her under the cottonwood, and the wind lifted her hair just enough to make her laugh. Years passed. The house grew another room, then a lean-to pantry, then a porch where Callum built a rocker for her hands to rest in after supper. Hazel taught Kathryn to brew elderflower tea for the winter coughs, and Kathryn taught the Cray boys to read from the old books Hazel had once given her. Callum's sister visited each fall, staying long enough to help with the potato harvest and leave behind hand-stitched quilts for their bed. Kathryn's hair grayed at the temples, but her stride stayed sure. Callum's shoulders broadened with the years, but his voice never lost its warmth when he called her name. On their 10th anniversary, they stood again at the edge of the pasture, the same spot where they had once looked out over the valley. The cattle shifted in the distance, and the wind carried the scent of sage and fresh-cut hay. "You still glad you stayed?" she asked, her fingers laced with his. "Every day," he said. And as the sun fell behind the hills, they walked back toward the house they had built, 2 shadows moving as one across the grass, the quiet shape of love carved deep into every step they took.